Welcome to Tech at Scale. Every week we bring on an incredible guest to help you grow as a developer. I'm your host, Corey Darby, and this is another episode of Tech at Scale. And I'm here with wonderful Andre,
Hey.
who's going to be our second guest now.
Yeah. Second
time guest.
Nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
I actually forgot. I didn't forget. I meant today's topic.
There we go.
So today's topic is, I guess, getting your first dev job. And I don't know about you, but man, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. I'm kind of it's scary right now. The competition was never like that. I don't remember it being that hard. Talking to people about it these days, I'm kind of like, I'm glad I missed it, but it was a while ago. And it wasn't as hard as it felt these days, or it feels these days. So I don't know.
Did you even have to do like a technical interview, or did?
Yeah,
you did. Was it right out of school, or?
So yeah, that's a good question. So my situation was interesting. I was basically working as a UX designer while finishing my studies, and was finishing up my master's degree. Finished it and was like, cool, I want to go be a dev. And there was like a bunch of small dev places, very like typical kind of application development stuff. And then Amazon opened up, and I was like, cool, that's the place to go to. And we had no idea what to expect because no one really knew what their interview process was going to be like. And it was mostly, tell me about what you've learned, show me that you can apply it. And if you could do that, you got the job. So there was no like cracking the code interview or leak code grinds or any of that sort of thing. There was some data structures with some algorithm stuff, but nothing crazy.
But I guess it was good because you were already primed with school and whatnot, right?
Exactly.
So, because I was going to say, I guess first dev job could be difficult depending on where you come from. Like, you know my wife Ashley, she went through a dev boot camp, and I'm like, you're not necessarily primed for the typical hard technical interviews. But then again, I also want to say it's like, I don't know if a lot of like FANG and pre-FANG companies will definitely look for that, but there is definitely category companies that very, very little on the hard technical stuff. So
yeah.
Do you think you have, like in the present day, do you have to do that? Like, do you have to come prepared with that? Like for a first, like a junior dev?
Yeah, that is such a hard question. I was trying to think about it a little bit, like from the bootcamp perspective, because I've got a very mixed kind of opinion on boot camps. But I think a lot of people get hung up with the whole like, this is what FANG companies are doing, we must do that. Not everyone does that. Not every company cares, and not every role requires you to do algorithm design. It doesn't require you to do like crazy ground up stuff. They want someone who's going to arrive and be like, yes, I can do this thing. Give me the tools. I know exactly what you're using. You know, I can use it. Put me in the desk and I can do it. Not all jobs need like, hey, we're doing groundbreaking stuff or something completely awkward that no one else has done. So yeah, I don't think so. But I think for FANG, it's kind of well understood. The other stuff, it's a mixed bag. Like you can go in and not know what to get.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't start with FANG. I'm not even at FANG now, so there was no FANG for me. And I remember my first dev job was no interview. I actually met someone at a meetup, and I was just talking about what I did and things, and I didn't know that there was a CEO of a small company in the town I lived in. And they were like, oh, we're looking to do stuff, so you should send me your resume. I sent my resume, and I went for like interview, which just was like, here's the stuff you'd be doing, and do you feel comfortable doing that? I was like, sure. And they brought me on as like part-time, and that was the end. that was my first job. There wasn't even a technical. I mean, like, I think the technical makes sense when you have a large amount of applicants coming in, because you weed out all the people who aren't willing to either do that or put in the effort to get there, or don't already have that knowledge. On the smaller companies, you're just like, oh, if we don't have enough applicants, it's like you hire, and then you're like, well, if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't work out, and ignoring the fact that, like, I don't mean just like behavioral and cultural and like productivity. I mean, like, okay, if you hire them, then clearly they don't know any technical skills. like they're just a total con, then you just let them go, right? So
it's kind of, I'm laughing so much at this idea because my second job had no interview. No interview at all. I ended up getting invited out for dinner by a friend of mine who I studied with, and he was like, "Hey, he got the super senior role at this company," and another friend of his is like got the startup going, like a spin-off of the company, sort of a incubator on something they're wanting to do. Maybe it's time for me to change jobs. And I was like, okay, so you've done your homework. I've been at Amazon for like 3 years at this time. Time to move on.
yep.
And I was expecting like, cool, it's a startup. This is going to be, I have no idea what their expectations are. Met the guy at a coffee shop and he was like, cool, so what have you been up to? And we chatted for like 25 minutes. And then he's like, okay, I need you to do like a meet and greet with the team. So I thought, here's the technical interview. Sat down with them and they were like, so what's up? And we chatted for like 10 minutes. And they're like, okay, cool, here's the job. I was like, you guys
like,
don't know anything about me, but okay.
What's your favorite pizza? And you were like, not with pineapple, like hired.
It was literally in line with that. It was like, I remember the discussion was something about like, so we like to have like beers on Friday after the work. I'm like, oh, I could be down for that. They're like, perfect. Like, okay, that was the hardest interview question you've given me. Very,
That was
very
the trick. If you were like, no, they were just like, that's it. Like,
yeah, a broken system completely.
Yeah, it's different. I think someone who's probably brand new, like, and not going to like, your typical Fang or pre-Fang, like your Uber, Lyft, Etsy, probably Wayfair, essentially they're under 500 employees and they're not a super hyped unicorn public company. And I guess people in that boat, should they be focused on what then? Like just having a strong behavioral interview, just like should they just be applying to like every single possible job they see, whether they fit the criteria or not? Or what are your feels on this?
So it was interesting. Someone the other day was talking about it in a stream, and they were saying like, do you optimize? The question boiled down to, do you optimize for the skills that the company needs for you to succeed there, or do you optimize for the interview? And 2 or 3 people were like, get in the door and learn from them. Don't worry about like necessarily, unless you're doing an expert interview, like they're looking for some kind of an expert on like some database technology or some kind of web framework or whatever. Don't even worry about that. Optimize for their interview, get in the door, and then you can learn with them and be paid to do it and do exactly what they're looking for, not kind of guesswork from the outside. The other catch though is you've got a lot of people, like I like the idea of boot camps from the perspective of you can get from 0 to some level of delivery within 6 months or whatever. What I don't like is that they're insanely expensive if you compare the cost of them to like formal education. They pitch it as a means of saving you time, so it should cost more, which I don't agree with at all. I think it's a little bit of a weird snake oil sales trip there. What I really don't like are boot camps that are optimized for passing the technical interview without any actual skill once you're involved or any desire. They're like, come on in, we'll teach you how to do dynamic programming, we'll teach you how to do a couple of recursive problems. You can get into like 80% of those companies between like just one run below pre-Fang and like everyone else. Like that middle to top tier, you can totally get a job. And people get jobs and then they arrive and they don't know what to do when they're there. I'm like, you're a product of the environment that you've paid a ton of money to pass this interview. Now you're in, now what? And those I don't like. I don't like that at all. I think you should be, I don't know, focusing on a getting the interview, but actually having the intention of learning the skills once you're there.
Do you think people who are doing their interviews, they should, like, I hear a lot of these stories online or even on Twitch of people having to apply like 50, 60 companies, even sometimes more, and as like, early in their career or junior dev, because I can get it on the other side, because it's like, okay, you're going to have to pass through all these rounds of interviews and be pass everything with flying colors, and have your expertise and skill match whatever that position is. But on the other side, it's like, I don't know. I guess my question here is better phrased as, why do you think people either have to do so many interviews or flunk out on their interviews? I guess it's a mix.
Yeah. I did a lot of interviewing of candidates at my previous role. We had a responsibility of providing. There were people who were sort of providing consistent experiences for all the interview candidates, and that was one of my roles. So I did about, I don't know, 75 interviews over a 8-month period, and I can definitely say that for junior candidates, if you flunk out on the behavioral interview questions, it does not matter how good you are at the technical side. You have a problem. So that's like a non-starter. There's a lot of reasons that people have an issue with that. Being confident is great. Being arrogant is acceptable depending on your skill set. But if you set the bar super high through your arrogance and they don't deliver on the technical side, you're not going to get it. And people will typically phrase that as like, this person came across as like overly confident or a jerk or whatever. The lack of kind of interview experience is something else I've noticed. People who try to narrow down where they're going to interview very early on, and they're like, I have no interest in any other company except for like this one. I don't think that's a good idea, just because you walk in and you have no idea what an interview is about. You don't know what to say. You don't know what kind of questions are going to be asked. And it's not rehearsing things. It's just general preparedness. Like, do you know how to do a actual short introduction? When I say to you, I've looked at your resume, it looks interesting, tell me about yourself. That's not talk for 45 minutes, because we're not going to get anywhere. It's also like, learn how to sell yourself in some context that makes sense. Arriving and being like, I got the top grades in my class. Cool, that's fine. But tell me, like, I can add value because of me having done this course or this interesting project or something like that. That is what a business
Probably,
wants.
I was going to say, probably like, don't reiterate the stuff just on your resume. Like, I've already
Yes.
read your resume.
Yes.
So, and even if I haven't read your resume, and then I pull up your resume, it's like, I don't need to hear that you're top of your class when you already said that. I mean, go further, like on either the project you did during that's not listed, or something that was beneficial that you learned. Like, hey, I worked in a team on this one project. Yeah, I didn't get a great grade on it, but it was really interesting project that I learned X, Y, Z, and I think that's applicable here.
Yep.
So, okay, so
yeah, and another one is, don't arrive and pitch it as like, I was the top of my class, therefore I'll be the top of the company. Like, that whole big fish, small pond situation, it changes rapidly. You have to be, especially coming out of college, it sucks. I was one of these people who was like, I did the top of my class, I'm amazing, you want to hire me. And then 2 weeks in, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. What the hell has happened? Like, the cabin has lost pressure. It's a weird sensation. And I needed that. I needed that really badly. But that doesn't always happen in time for candidates, where they get to the interview and they're just hyper confident, hyper arrogant, and it's a non-starter.
okay, makes sense. I mean, I did think that I totally agree with the fact that on the behavioral side, like, it's one thing if you're exceptional on the technical and then your behavioral is kind of meh, because like, it's a scale, right? Like, I always say when I'm interviewing other people, that it's not one thing that gets you to not get the offer. It's like a strikes or weight. The scale is balanced at the start, and then there's things that get added as we go, or removed or put on the other side, depending on how you look at the scale and whatnot.
Yep.
And they're just things that you come in and it's like, and the behavioral, a lot of it is just like, come on, like, if you couldn't even like spend the 15 minutes reading like company values and somewhat try to portray your way in that. Whether or not you are actually 100% sold on like, oh my God, I believe the vision of like e-commerce and we're totally going to be the next future of that company is a whole other thing. But at least knowing like, oh, they talk a lot about ownership. So I should probably in my interview talk about how I'm able to like pick up a piece of code and own that code base and like really dive down into something and like wanting the permission to take something on and go with it, right? You know, there's a lot of interviews that I feel like people don't. I've had interviews where they'll research the product side and they'll want to talk about the product. And it's like, that's great that you're interested in the product, and then like nothing else relates to like the company's core values, and you're just like, WTF, like and the worst thing is a lot of companies have career pages that literally list out like, here's 10 things that we care about, and it's like, well, you should probably tie in like 3 of those, one to whatever you're writing up to send in the company. Damn, my camera. I don't know why, but
there we go. You're back.
Yeah, the camera is 30 minutes before it turns off the display, and there's no way to disable.
Okay.
So
Perfect. No, we keep going.
We'll always have bloopers.
Fantastic.
I was.
I was getting like totally antsy about what you were saying there, because people arrive and they're like, yes, your product is like this. And like you said, company values are, you don't have to necessarily buy into all of them, but it's the way the company communicates and it's the expectations that are had, because everyone's kind of got they're in the same, it's not necessarily the same lane, it's like the same direction from the company values. And if you're in the interview, especially if you're a junior candidate and you disagree with those, that's not the greatest thing you can do. Like, that is a career limiting situation for sure. If you're very senior and adjust them slightly, it's sort of an acceptable thing to do. But if those don't agree with you, you shouldn't be interviewing there. That's what's happening. You're joining a team. That team has agreed upon some direction or some intention, and you can't just be like, oh no, I don't care about them, or I haven't looked at them, because it's showing a lack of interest. And if you don't have that, that's a pretty bad start.
Yeah, it's, you know, the other thing I will say, especially on, because the topic is about getting your first dev job, so it's someone new in the field. I've done a lot of co-op interviews, and holy man, those are on like a whole other level. I will say there are a lot of times I will sit there and I will try and turn the table to like, oh, I see you did blah blah blah. Could you tell me something of interest? And they'll just like read the same thing off, or like, it's, you know, when I interview, I actually like to find companies that I'm able to kind of steer the interview process a little bit. Maybe like put it in my favor. Like, okay, well, I don't really want to do this thing that I'm probably going to be garbage at. So maybe if I can get us into like something else, and if the interviewer is open to it, like, oh, you know, I saw you did blah, blah, let's talk a bit about that and walk me through something. You know, it's like, great. Like, this is a time to shine and show some sort of expertise or some value add to the company. Like, it's relating what you've done somewhat back to the company. Because if you can't find a way to do that, and you're just like, oh yeah, I did this blah, blah, blah application and it was difficult. It's like, okay, well, they're dedicated. They can get through code. Like, they understand the code. But that sounds a lot better when you're like, hey, I did blah, blah, this Java application. And I know it's related to the product that you're working on because I saw blah, blah, blah. It uses X, Y, Z, or it's related to this, or I have interest in that, exploring further. But I would say new people, at least what I've seen in co-ops, like, they're really hesitant on like the tables being on their side. Like, they're really like almost like a school structure of like, I'm not going to say anything until I'm asked.
Yeah.
And like, I give you my direct answer to only what you asked, and that's it. Like, I don't want to fill any other time. I don't want to talk about any other achievement, nothing. It's just like, why should you work here? They have their 3 list points that they've written, and like, that's it. And like, I could say, and it's like, so
yeah, it's a
I mean,
one.
preparation's good though.
Yeah, I think the thing that you're mentioning there is like one directional interviewing. You can't be under the impression that it's not a survey. It's not a like, I'm going to ask you these 15 questions and you say yes or no, and then we're going to get to the end and it's going to be like, yes, you passed or you didn't. It's not a multiple choice exam, like you're saying, like a school.
Personality test.
Yeah, exactly. Those scare the crap out of me. But those sort of interviews, I want to be in an interview where the person who I'm interviewing, especially if they're junior, shows me that they at least know what they want. And the only way they can do that is by engaging with me, by asking questions about the stuff we're chatting about, and actually having input, because you're showing me it's one of the few things that we can do in an interview which really mimics what our day job is going to be like. You're joining the team,
Yep.
and we're chatting about this, and I say to you, let's talk about frameworks. What have you worked with? What haven't you worked with? Just some arbitrary example. And then like, I did framework X for this website. I'm like, okay, cool. Why? Like, what part of it motivated you? And they're like, well, this and this and this. Like, don't make things up. If you got tasked with it because it was the assignment, that's cool. Whatever. If you didn't, let's actually chat about this. This is a real conversation that we expected to have. Like, people don't want junior engineers who are like, maybe some people do because they're just yes people, but you want a person who will work with you and actually attain some level of autonomy quickly. And showing me that through an interview is important. But again, it's a balancing act. So I think interacting, thinking about what kind of questions you're going to ask, thinking about the company culture, understanding these aren't technical questions. These are just general. I assume they'll come out of anyone who is interested in the company or the role or the responsibility or whatever the case is, just to generally have some interest that it shows.
Well, the other thing on somewhat related is, I was thinking it's less a tactic for newcomers, but I think it's still applicable for new devs. Is I think more people should leverage the recruiter that they're dealing with to understand the process better.
Yes.
For example, I had interviewed at Coinbase at one point, and the recruiters, I will give them total props. Kim, if you're watching this, you are a great recruiter for Coinbase, because they would actually book time outside of the interview process to actually coach you on like, here's what our expectations are is in the next stage. Here's typically what your next interviewer is looking to get out of it. And if you were like me and you're just like, all right, I'm just writing this shit down as you talk. Like, some of it was like word for word, legit the question and stuff. And it's like, wow, okay, that's definitely a leg up. And it's not like, oh, you could con your way through this because you knew the question they were going to ask, but you didn't on the spot have to go up and be like, right, what was a good time that I did a hard technical task with teammates that was near the end of a deadline, but we're able to bring it back? And you spend like this awkward 5 minutes going like, well, yeah, there was this time, and you don't have a straight answer. So just the preparation, leveraging your recruiter to know exactly what the process looks step by step. Knowing, okay, is the next one a behavioral interview? Is it going to be mixed? Is it going to be technical questions? If it is technical questions, what are those level of technical questions and the expectation? Like, are we talking data structures and algos, or are we talking like a FizzBuzz challenge or a take-home test at the end? Like, whatever it may be, knowing this gives you the time, and it's fine to go back to a recruiter and just say, look, for me, on the management side, if I were to go apply for a job, I have to honestly tell them, like, if you have a data structure and algo portion, I need at least 3 to 4 weeks to be able to participate in the interview process. Like, I'll just be upfront and be like, my day-to-day life is like almost no code at all. Like, it's at best like pull request and like DevOps, like YAML Kubernetes stuff. So it's like, if you're gonna sit me there and literally ask me to be like, hey, yeah, from scratch, write something that's gonna solve this, and it's like, I'm going to be like, bro, what is the syntax for XYZ again? Like,
yep. No, it's not fair, and I'm going to be totally honest with this one. The treatment you get as a senior developer looking for a job compared to a junior is like first class versus, I don't know, like not even economy. You're being handled like luggage when you're being put on the plane. It's not fair. It's very, very, very skewed. My experience this time around when I went job hunting was like, here is a person who is at your disposal. I was getting replies within an hour on, like, I don't know, it was 9 p.m. on a Sunday, and I was getting replies within an hour from our recruiter.
Yeah.
And the questions were the kind of things that you were saying, like, hey, I've got a couple of questions. And they were very, very honest questions, like, what has caused most people to fail, in your opinion? Tell me about what I should be doing for my preparation in terms of, like, how does this translate to like lead code questions? Should I be focusing on like the ultra hard ones? And the responses are completely candid. Like, don't worry about the hard ones, focus on the medium ones, focus on getting them done quickly. And then they were very, very honest with me. Like, some companies do this as quickly as you can. We do not care about nicety, maintainability, get it done. Other ones are like, write production code and then tell us about what you would do to like make it quicker, have to-dos or whatever. Those sort of things, you can be completely honest with your recruiter and say, like, tell me what I should be expecting here. How should I be preparing? What have you seen people do that's worked? What have you seen people do that doesn't work? And you can get answers. But often juniors are so petrified about that. And that also makes me think of requirements for jobs. I almost ignore them. That's my opinion. Like,
to extent though. Like, if you're brand new and it's like expected 15 plus years of experience, you're like, yeah, let's apply. Like, I mean, you could apply if you really want it, but like, I think you can stretch it where it's like, 2x, maybe 1.5x, whatever they're asking for. So if they're asking for someone 2 years and you have 1 year, just apply. If they're asking for 4 years and you got 2 years, just apply. But if you got 2 years and they're asking for plus 10 years, like, you could apply for the sake of just trying to go through the process. But like, the realistic thing is probably not even going to hear back from them, because you're going to get, and that's like a whole other thing I guess I could mention is like, you can be well qualified for a company on a technical and behavioral level and just get screened out right at the recruitment level. Like, I've seen that a lot, especially, like I said, as a software development manager, especially at the last company I worked at, because it was so large, like 1,600 employees. Oh, large. I mean, you're going to a much larger company, but like,
it's big, yeah.
So it's like, at one point I had actually gone back through the HR pipeline before it even technically would get to me, and just going through candidates that they rejected. And it's like, what the fuck? Why did we reject that? And like, you have to remember that some of these recruiters aren't technical people. Like, some of them will know some lingo. And it's like, well, you said you're looking for like, Java dev. And I'm like, yeah, but this person has 5 years in like Golang. Like, we could totally use this. Like,
yes.
Like, God damn it. Like, so, I hate getting resumes that are just like blanket everything, but I almost feel like you have to put some of that to some extent to get through that first layer of filtering. Referrals is probably the best thing here, is what I was going to get to. It's just, if you have a referral in a company, typically you can just bypass that first filter.
Exactly.
And
I looked at my first resume recently, actually shortly before this, and I did the whole blanket thing. It's like a explosion of keywords, I know everything about everything. I'm like, why the hell did I tell people I knew XML? Like, what am I trying to do here?
Well,
Yeah.
especially now, some of the companies just hire software that will scan, and if you don't match some filter, you just reject. So if you're a dev looking for your first time job, if you have a referral in the company, I highly suggest using that referral,
Yes.
because like all the companies I've worked at, if you had a referral in the company, you skipped over that first screening, and you went directly to the HR phase where they would do like the initial core values and salary comp to make sure it's in line with what the company can pay. And after that, you're on the road to the technical stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. And the referral thing is interesting. My very first boss said to me that developers who typically know what they're doing will never actively look for a job. They will always be contacted. And it's completely true. A number of people I've worked with have never had to actively look for jobs. They've done it, but just sort of exploring what's happening outside. But almost every job they've accepted has been a referral, has been someone in the company that's like, hey, you should come work with us, or this should be an interesting change for you. So once you get in, that's it. And if you do know someone, like you're saying, use it. Like reach out to them, have them send the email, just send them, CC them on the mail would probably be
yeah,
enough.
well, it reminds me of actually one of the people who are on my team. They got hired literally over lunch, and it was because they didn't even apply. I literally went to the CTO and I was like, okay, this person's in my top 10 list, and I'm bringing them to like tour the office, just to show them where I worked and stuff. And they were visiting the city. And he's like, okay, let's bring them for lunch, like whatever, okay. And we go for lunch, and just asking a bunch of questions. And I'm like, see, well, this is why this person's like my yin to my yang, and like they're great and all that. And we get back, and literally they're like, all right, let's hire him. And I was like, what?
Done.
And I told him, and I was like, literally they're going to send you an offer. And he's like, I haven't even talked to HR. Like, I don't even know what the benefits in the company are. Like, and one could flip the script and say like, oh, that's not fair because people are breaking the process. And uh, there's a whole other side of this with like, that's how you can build a company of not diversity and things like this. Arguably for me, it's like, okay, this person disagrees with me on plenty. Um, like
Yeah.
there have been people I've referred, I would arguably say that I don't even like working with them. Like they're just a pain to work with, but I know that their skill is superior in whatever thing, and that they should be hired and it would benefit the company. And like I like working with them at times, but other times you're like, God damn it, I hate how much you argue on my system design. Like,
Yeah.
but that's because you're good, and you just take a different stance than me, and that's fine. I think you just don't want a company of yes people. But as long as you're avoiding that, you know, because the flip side is yes, they have an advantage, and why didn't they go through the process? Is like in this case, this person went through the process. They worked with me for 4 years.
Yeah.
I know what they're capable and what we're going to get. It's not like the normal interviewer is like, well, we've never worked with this person before and no one knows them, and that's why we have a process. But when you work with someone that long, you're not sitting there going, oh, if we bring this person to the company, like, one, do they actually know what they're talking about? It's like, well, yeah, because they literally wrote the code with me on blah. Two, are they actually going to be productive? It's like, well, once again, work them with them for like, are they going to match core values? You're like, well, you hired me.
Yeah.
So it's like, either we got a bigger problem here where you probably shouldn't have hired me then. But yeah, referrals I think are definitely underrated. So I guess the gist of this.
It's I also feel like I have a mixed feeling about referrals because it does lead to a situation where the people who are in the know better kind of better themselves at this exponential rate versus everyone else. And you're like, how do you do this? But my opinion of this has changed quite a lot because you don't have to do it's not like it used to be where it was like you have to work with this person. You can go to a meetup. You can meet someone in some forum somewhere. You could meet someone
Yep.
chatting on Twitch. You can do all of these things and get to know them. You can send a pull request to GitHub. All of these things can contribute to you actually being close enough to someone to be able to get a referral from them, or to have a referral conversation with them at least. So it's not that bad where you can't claim you're the misunderstood genius who's hiding under a rock and no one appreciates you. That's maybe used to be the case for a bunch of people a long time ago, but I think it's less and less the case. So try what you can. And even going for an interview, you could meet someone like literally during lunch at the interview, add them to your LinkedIn, and like 5 years later, they could be available to help you out in another company. Like, networking is important, but it's
That's
not
exactly how I
yeah.
got my job now. I almost exactly. Before I worked at a different company, I applied at a different company, and I got through the whole interview process. We're at the last spot. They're going to make an offer. They're not going to make the offer. And how I got to that company was actually through LinkedIn. I reached out to the CTO of the company. I was like, I don't see a job posting that fits what I'm looking for. Here's my resume. Here's things I've done. Here's how it's applicable to your company.
Mm-hmm.
And I get back, okay, you should interview. Actually, it was more like, if you're ever in this other city that's 6 hours away from where I was living, let me know. And I told my wife, and it was like, I think I'm just going to go. I'm just going to message them and ask them, like, if I'm there on this day, can you meet me for lunch?
Yeah.
So I went there, and there was no expectation of anything. But I met them, and they're like, you need to interview. So I start that process, and the short answer is I did not get the job. And then that CTO left the company and went to a different company. And in a month, he messaged me. He's like, you want to come work at this company?
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, like I want to work at the last company you were at, but it just didn't pass the hiring committee. And he's like, okay, great. There's no hiring committee here. You're like, I really showed up for the interview. He's like, and I'm thinking like, oh God, this is gonna be so, like, I need to be prepared and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I get in the interview with him, and he's like, oh no, I've already decided I'm hiring you. Let me tell you about the company and like where you're gonna fit in and stuff. And I'm like there was other interviews I actually had to do that was legit,
Mm-hmm.
but networking is a big deal. Like, that was over the span of 2-3 years, I think, of just Go ahead.
I was going to say the networking thing to me is weird because it's providing a data point. It's not like you bypassing the interview. You're just providing a data point that someone else could try and get through an interview, but they've got a better one because they've spoken to you, they've met you, they've done things, maybe projects with you. So that's that. It's not a cheat. It's the way to. It's a more efficient way to do it.
It's not a cheat. It's the more efficient way of doing it. I feel like that should be the quote of this episode.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it? It's like Andre says, the left, right, up, down, whatever. He has the cheat code, but it's not a cheat code. It's just more efficient.
It's the more efficient way to do things. Yeah, because I do appreciate, especially with the lack of diversity that happens, and I don't think anyone can argue that, especially at an IC level, the diversity is lacking completely. But I hope it's being improved on. But I think there's something about the side tracks or the side channels for these interviews, like whether you're socializing, whether you're doing a YouTube channel, whether you're streaming, whether you're partaking in some open source project that's got another number of other people, and that's how you're getting the attention. Those things all provide some data point somewhere. And in my opinion, I have not heard of anyone use those negatively. No one I've worked with has been like, I looked at this person's GitHub account and they're terrible. It's been like, I looked at it, I don't have any opinion, or I looked at it and it's amazing, and something gets said. So there's all of these like take the shot. It's not going to cause a negative unless you're a horrendous person, in which case you've got bigger problems. But there's nothing wrong with trying to fit in as many ways as you can in the space that you're trying to get into.
Yeah, there's always some sort of side door, and they're not. I mean, I don't think they're unachievable because I think a lot of them is just right place, right time.
Yes.
It's not even like, oh, because of your credentials or your criteria or because like whatever, a lot of times it's just like, hey, you happen to be there and found someone who talked to you. I mean, this is a whole other thing of like, well, if you go to an event and you just have your head down on your phone, the likelihood of you meeting someone is probably pretty slim. So it probably helps to actually engage in those events. But
yeah, the antisocial social club.
yeah,
I've
so
been to those.
I guess the introverts are a little bit at a disadvantage there. Like, if you go to the event and you listen to the talk, but you piece right afterwards, it's going to be hard to build up the network. But that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, so you're new and you're going for interviews. Like, do you have a really like what's your number one kind of takeaway there? Is it just prepare plenty? Is it like polish up the resume and just apply everywhere? Is it,
Yeah, that's so for me, it's been an interesting one because my biggest shortfall wasn't the technical side. It was becoming incredibly anxious before interviews and then freaking out when asked a question I didn't know the answer to, which is essentially what technical interviews are.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to people who I'd studied with, people I'd worked with similar experience, like in terms of going to school, nothing extraordinary about them in contrast to me. And they were like, why are you not getting into these interviews? Like when it wasn't my first job, but it was like looking around from my first job. And they were like, clearly you need to work on the whole anxiety thing. And that was weirdly enough, the thing that really triggered me was practice being uncomfortable with your situation. Assume the question you've gotten is the worst possible thing, that one area that you suck at, and learn how to be okay with that. And that to me was the one thing that really helped me out. And in interviewing other people, I'm noticing something similar where if you get in your own head in the interview, the read I get from you is non-existent. At the end of it, there's been a lot of walking in circles. There's been a lot of disconnected thoughts. There's been very little communication. Everything we're looking for is missing. And it's not that it's bad. It's just that I have no way of saying it's good. So try and communicate clearly whatever is going on. If you don't provide me a solution, I don't know if you had no way of discussing it, or if you were fixated on the optimal solution, or if you remembered some like groundbreaking thing. Like practice the interview process and practice being able to go from uncomfortable to even saying, like, I now start my interviews with, I don't interview very well because I get super anxious, bear with me. And the people are like, oh cool, immediately they kind of lower their guard a little bit. And then when you're confronted with a question, whether it be a design question, whether it be an experiential question, behavioral, whatever, slow down, say to them like, wow, I wasn't expecting that question. Holy crap, that's not what I was expecting you to go with. Or I knew there was going to be a dynamic programming question. I hate them because they always catch me out. Let me try and work through this. Maybe this is like the first pass or whatever. So it was a process problem for me personally. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So you can have the technical skills, you can have the experience, you can have the right attitude, but you're just not prepared for an interview. So do mock interviews with everyone who's willing to do a mock interview with you, and pick people who are argumentative and be like, would you mind interviewing with me? And don't hold back and do that. So the interview, when you're new, you don't have a resume. You don't have anything to go off of. You don't have any experience to be like, hey, this is what I've done. I can show you that I've done something. it's literally that hour that you're with that person that you have to express yourself as best you can. So that would be my thing.
I mean, do you think it'd also be helpful having something before, like someone who interviews but has something to show, like a side project or open source contribution, or like, do you think that's even a requirement at that level? Or I mean, I think it helps that person stand out, obviously, but because I've had people who are like, principal software developers and have like 0 contributions open source, and they're just like, listen, I work, my life is my work, and then I go home and I stop coding, and like that is it. That is why my GitHub page is empty.
Yep.
And then I've had other people who are just complete opposite. It's like every day is a contribution to some open source project, and all their life after work is just I had a friend I always joked with that I said, you just give them coffee or beer and they write code. Like that is their fuel.
That's it.
So do you think it's a requirement or something that someone should do before interviewing around, or do you think people should just plunge, like whether or not they have something to show?
So I had a weird one. I never fall in the bucket of like open source contribution. I never did it. I tried starting many blogs and realized all the interesting stuff I could write about was proprietary or potentially proprietary, and it was going to be a problem. So I was like, well, this is not going to work. But the thing I had going for me was I did a bunch of coding contests in college, afterwards played around with them and used that as the kind of the talking point, which was, I think it came across as I am interested in solving problems, and I'm not just telling you this, but I'm legitimately doing this for fun on my own time. Like, who rushes home on a Saturday to do a coding contest? Like, younger me apparently, but that was like something that acted in my favor. But I don't ever want to hold it against people to say, why are you not doing this for free on the side? There's so many memes at the moment about like how broken the interview process is, where you testing a doctor and it's like, hey, I need you to show me how you would like perform the following medical procedure, or like, what do you mean you don't do pro bono work on the weekend? Like, what kind of lawyer are you? So it's not it shouldn't be an expectation. But the people who I have interviewed who have got strong open source involvement are seemingly very good at what they do. And I don't think it's because you have a GitHub account, it makes you great. I think there's a causal relationship there. They're wanting to do something, they're learning. The reasons I've heard is that the person said to me, they want to learn, but they want to apply what they're learning. They don't like abstract, just reading a book for no purpose. So they will go in and contribute to some project or whatever the case is. And they've been very, very strong at their coding. But I don't think it should be an expectation. However, it does let you stand out. It's like the side door conversation we had. It's not a hard requirement that you can name drop 5 people who work at the company. But if you do have that, it's just that little bit. At a junior level, the base of the pyramid is so damn big. There's thousands of resumes competing for the same position, and you have to stand out somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a digital signal, I think, as I was saying before, right? I guess, I hear a lot of people struggle with like, well, how do I find an open source project to contribute to and things like that. And I think maybe you have a difference on this, but my personal opinion is just start your own project. Like just even if it's garbage, just start it and build up and improve that. Because trying to jump in a lot of the open source projects is difficult task. Like, kudos to the people who are able to go in from the outside and find a way to contribute and pick up a GitHub issue. Because there are products I use in my day job, and I have looked at issues and I'm like, well, I kind of want to contribute that. And then you're like, where do I start in this 50,000 file code base that has existed for 7 years, and this calls that and this calls this, and oh, this is only here on legacy and don't use these methods, because there's actually like a document that talks about deprecating that, but unless you've read all the community documents or been a part of all the mailing lists, you would never know that. So I think it's a lot easier to just pick something that you find interesting yourself, do it to stand out. And but because there could be newer people watching this, I would say don't get caught up on like, I can't apply unless I have something.
No, not at all.
Like, you know, because it's an excuse. You're using that as a barrier of applying, and then that's always going to be this blocker, right? Like, you know, we had talked a little bit before the show, and I said, I have the intro, the sound could be a lot better, but I know I need to just go. I just need to put out the content, and then I can come and fix it. So the same applies here, I think.
The thing that people don't realize, I think a lot of juniors don't realize, is the interview process is very, very skewed. The chance of you being good enough is independent of them getting a read that you're good enough. They err on the side of not hiring people who might not be good enough. So if you meet the bar and you're a little bit over it, there's a chance you get a no. But it doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means that their read was not right. So you need to be fine with the idea that you're going to interview places and they're going to say no. I got no's from, the best way I can describe it, is shitty companies. And then I got a yes from Facebook, which doesn't make sense because in theory, the difficulty of getting in on the one should be harder than the other. But their process was horrendously skewed. And I went in like you shouldn't do, and I had no idea what I was expecting, arrived, and they were like, I need you to code this. And I'm like taking my time, talking about how I would do this in production. At the end of it, the guy was like, so all we wanted was a fast solution. We don't care. I'm like, oh, great. I totally misfired 100%. And because of that, I didn't give them a good read. So you have to be willing to try. And like you say, just iterate on the process. Go, fail, find out why you failed. You can try again.
I think that last bit is really critical, though. I think people go, they fail, and they don't
ask why.
They don't try and find out what they could improve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you went to that interview, let's say, and you know, in your example, you're like, oh, I learned that there's going to be some companies that just want the solution as fast as possible and they don't care about the others. I see a lot with. Go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing. Yeah.
I was gonna say I see it a lot with people who go in the interview and they're like, "Oh, I guess I'm not good enough," and it's like, you know, whatever they've come up with, and then I ask them like, "Okay, what was the interview?" And like, was there anything that you said like you don't know? And it's fine to not know, but now the interview has finished, so you should go and find out what you didn't know, so that next time when you interview and someone's like, "Hey, how do I do blah blah blah?" You don't go, well, I don't know. You actually like, hey, I have the solution. It might not be the most optimal, but here's what I'm thinking. Like, and if you do enough interviews, you're just going to cover all your gaps, right? I will say that on that, the hardest thing, regardless of the position, at least how I've interacted with it is extremely hard to get feedback from the companies.
Yes.
Like non like fluffy, like, well, we're pursuing another candidate. It's like, yeah, but why? Like there's an obvious reason somewhere why. It's just either the candidate is so much better than me on X, Y, Z, or I failed somewhere, or I'm not aligning on something. And you know, no one wants to give you like a bad taste in your mouth, and and you read it. Sometimes it's just it feels like being served like a plate of just dog shit that you're just told to eat, because it's like, oh, we're deciding to not move forward and go with another candidate, but in the future totally would be open to, and in that moment you're like, I'm probably never applying back at this company. Let's be real. like rarely are you going to apply back. Like maybe if it's like a company that you are like, listen, I know I wasn't good enough for a process, but a lot of times you're like, well, then if I don't know what I did wrong, why would I reapply? Like, if I'm not a good fit for the core values and you're not going to tell me that, why am I going to go back through a whole other process? Like, unless there's something obvious that I feel like you click and you're like, well, yeah, I totally failed on blah, blah, blah. Like, they asked me to do X and I just blanked that day. So do you have any strats for getting better feedback from the companies? Oh, you do?
I figured this one out. So typically it becomes the early filter problem again, where the person who you've given your resume to has no idea what they're looking for. They're like, you said Java, they want Go, not happening, or like you could have. There are resumes that I would love to have people apply with, like 10 years of Haskell, like Linux kernel experience, and like an open source GitHub project on like a 3D game engine. That kind of person could do anything, and they will never meet the requirements for any resume, and they get filtered out.
Oh, just quickly, I was going to say, do you remember CTO Facebook for Oculus Rift? John Carmack.
Oh yeah.
He posted a position. He's like, by the way, I wouldn't even fulfill this position, and it's like it's a dev position for the Oculus Rift. So
it's insane. Yeah. So there are positions that just don't make any sense, and they get filtered. And if you apply for the position and you get rejected, I've said to people, "You said I don't fit. Is there anything on my resume that you're explicitly looking for, or is there a problem with the duration?" And it seems like phrasing it that way, you can at least get some like point form answer. If you just say, "Why did I not get through?" you don't get anything. And then on the rejection side, when I've gotten back to people, I've said to them, because normally I'll get the rejection mail from the recruiter who I'm in contact with, or the HR person.
Yeah.
And I'll say to them, "Thank you so much for coming back to me. I really appreciate it." And a bunch of other companies just ghost, and it shows that you're, so I kind of bolster them a little bit. And then I say to them, "If possible, could you provide me the feedback? Don't worry about getting something formally written up by the interviewers. Any feedback you have already would be very useful for me." And you'll be amazed, because sometimes you get like the raw notes coming straight back that are like, "He took too long on this. This was done well. Why was he talking about this? This doesn't make any sense." I'm like, that is more useful than the PR like release that they're going to give me, the little press spiel. So that's the tactic I've used before. Just say like, "I'd love to get feedback, and I want to do this so I can apply to you again." That's another one. If you say to them,
"Oh, I really like that line."
"Yeah, when can I apply to you again? And is there something I can do to be more ready for the second interview?" And you get, like, I've contacted an HR person and said to them, "I'm so sorry that it didn't work out this time. Obviously, there's something I was not expecting that came up." This was for the company that they just wanted an answer really, really quickly, or one of them.
Yep.
And I said to them, like, "I fulfilled what I thought was a good solution, but you said no. Is there anything like we can chat about so that when I apply again, and by the way, how long does it take for me to apply again?" And I got a message back from the hiring manager who was like, "Thanks so much for the interest. It's a 6-month cooldown. The problem was that your test cases didn't cover the exhaustive list, and you could have just done it in this efficient way, like in a less efficient way, just to get it done." And I was like, "Oh, awesome. Now I have a relationship with this person so that I can actually call on them next, like when I need another job." So try and find that out. And after the interviews, get a read as well. I know that's uncomfortable, but that you become like pretty much tolerant to discomfort after enough interviews, where you do the interview, someone says to you, "Thank you so much for this solution. Do you have any questions for me?" And don't say, "Oh, did I pass?" because that's very awkward and typically not going to work well. But say, "I'm curious, is there a better solution that you have had people answer?" Or something along those lines, and see how far off the board you were. Like you can be very far off, or you could be pretty much on track. But also be prepared for a shitty answer when you go, "I provided this like n cubed solution. Is there a better way?" And they're like, "Yeah, there's like an n." You're like, "Oh, cool, I suck." Move on to the next interview. So yeah, be prepared for that, but ask. You have to freaking ask.
And I think that's a great spot to end. I think we're 1 minute off the hour, and remember, the takeaway is you're not cheating, you're just more efficient. I think that is the key takeaway here is find the cheat codes, but they're not cheat codes. It's just being more efficient. So with that said, I'm going to end the broadcast, and until next time, adios.
Cheers, everyone.